that, but we'll make it through even if we don't. So I think, Don has recently taken a new job in North Carolina. So Anita and I are going to share duties today, and then the next 4 weeks I'm going to be on my own. So we'll look forward to continuing to study Esther together. So let me start out with our vision. This class has been about Esther serving without a safety net. And our vision we are disciples of Jesus Christ, growing in his likeness, reflecting God's love and generous service to others. So the concept of serving without a safety net. Embracing God's diverse creation, which we embody in joyful worship. So we're going to start out in just a couple minutes with a question, but I'm going to give you a little time to think about the question, because I'm hoping maybe 3 or 4 of us will be able to give an example in your life of this. So here's the question. Did you ever get something you didn't feel you deserved? Did you ever get something that you didn't feel you deserved? Or did you not get something that you thought you did deserve? So we'll think about that. I've got one example from many years ago, and we'll see if we can share some of those. But before that, I know we've got some folks that are in class for the first time, and we're about halfway through Esther. So who can give me some background on what we know about Haman? What do we know about Haman?
Bad dude.
Okay, Haman's a bad dude. And why is that?
Well, I think he can be described as power hungry and full of himself, but he also hated the Jews and did not appreciate anyone who didn't want to bow down to him. And so he sought retribution against one man that he knew was a Jew who wouldn't bow down.
Okay, perfect. What was Haman's nationality background? Anyone remember? So he was an Amalekite. And the Amalekite and the Jews did not get along. The Amalekites and the Jews battled after the Jews left Egypt. God had said to the Israelites as they began to battle with the Amalekites, I don't want the world to even remember that Amalekites ever were on the earth. Wanted them completely destroyed. So if Haman's around, obviously they weren't completely destroyed. So they didn't follow God's instructions. There were Amalekites that were left alive. They still had some of their possessions. And so now Haman is a descendant of the Amalekites. It was mentioned that he was sort of power hungry and he wanted folks to bow down to him. Where was Haman in the pecking order underneath King Xerxes? Anyone remember? He was basically number 2. So Haman had a lot of power. He had a big ego. He was power hungry. And he absolutely despised the fact that Mordecai did not bow down to him. In fact, do you remember when he was talking to his wife and friends, how did he refer to Mordecai? Do you remember what term he used? He wasn't just Mordecai the Jew, he was Mordecai that Jew. And you could almost feel the emphasis that he had in his description when he said that Jew. So who was Mordecai? What do we know about Mordecai? Where did he usually hang out during the day? Outside the gates of the king. So, and we don't know for sure why. In some cases, he may have been conducting business, but he hung outside the gates of of the king Xerxes. What was his relationship with Esther, the book name? He was close. I believe he was cousin.
Cousin mostly. Every once in a while you see one of the, there's the stories in various historical writings. Some of them say uncle, most of them say cousin, older cousin. Yeah, exactly. So uncle, cousin.
Yeah. So he was old enough that when Esther was orphaned, and we're not told how she was orphaned, when she was orphaned, he cared for Esther. So Esther, I'm sorry?
Her mentor.
Yes, and mentor, teacher, provider. So Mordecai is an uncle or an older cousin. So what did Mordecai hear about at the gates? Anyone remember?
Somebody was going to kill the king.
That's right. Two of the folks that were part of the king's entourage were plotting to kill the king. And so Mordecai hears about it, and Mordecai goes and gets word through Esther to the king that there's going to be this plot to kill him. So that'll tie into the lesson today. Who was Esther? Esther was the queen. And how did Esther become the queen?
She was beautiful. She was summoned with several other beautiful, lovely women, and they had to go through this 6-month training to become worthy of being presented to the king.
Perfect. So the king had thrown this big banquet. Everybody was invited to the banquet, and really he was showing off the wealth of the kingdom. And so he calls the queen to, prior to Esther, he calls the queen to come in front of all these guests and let me present you. For whatever reason, the queen said, I'm not coming. So the king's sort of in a turmoil here, so he gets all his best advisors together and says, what do you think? Does anyone remember what the advisor said?
Yeah. Do away with her.
Do away with
Not
it.
murder.
Get a new queen.
Get a new queen. And what was one of the reasons they wanted a new queen? They said, because all the other women aren't going to listen to their husbands either. So could you imagine if word gets out and you don't deal with this, every man out there is going to now have a problem with his wife.
So nothing's changed in 3,000
Nothing's changed in 3,000 years. So they summoned all the beautiful young virgins, and Esther may have been in her early to mid-teens at the time, and she goes through all these beauty treatments for months, and it may have been up to a year that she goes through all these beauty treatments. And so they start bringing all the different potential queens before the king, and they choose Esther. Now, the Jews were under Persian rule at the time. They weren't slaves, but they were still under the rule of Xerxes of Persia. So Mordecai tells Esther, whatever you do, don't tell him what? Don't tell him you're a Jew. So Mordecai's at the gate. Esther's now the queen. Haman's number 2 in command. Haman hates the Jews, and likewise, the Jews sort of hate the Amalekites. So as Haman would go through the town, everyone was expected to bow down before him. He's number 2 in command, you're supposed to bow. So what do you think Mordecai does? Mordecai doesn't bow down. So that's a little bit of lead up into where we're going to be today, especially for those that weren't in class prior. Anita, anything else leading up to this point that we should bring up?
I think we're good.
Okay, so now back to the question. Did you ever get something that you did not deserve? Or did you ever fail to get something that you thought you did deserve? So, some of you know yesterday was my birthday. It was a traumatic one for me this year. I now have to present my Medicare card when I go to the doctor. In fact, 1st of January, I went and I see the dermatologist where he'll zap the precancerous things. And after I get out, we're standing among the folks to pay our thing, and I'm shaking, handing her my Medicare card, and told her what a traumatic experience it was. And she was so young, she didn't seem to care. So now, for my example of getting something that I didn't think I deserved, goes back quite a few years. I'm pretty sure I was 10 years old, so this has been 55 years ago. We were in the cafeteria. At the time, we'd go out on recess, and then right after recess, we would go in to have lunch. And a bunch of tables were set up just like this, and there was about 6 or 8 of us that sat together. And it was most of the guys that sat together. It was our basketball team. So our center, who was a foot taller than the rest of us, his name was Jeff Woodling. So we'd been out on the playground. It must have been wet because when we get in, one of the kids in the group had a leaf stuck to the bottom of his shoe. And we're eating, and do you remember when we were in school, we had those little milk cartons that you had to open up, and you had an opening about this big, and so anyhow, one of the kids that had the leaf on his shoe thought it would be funny to put the leaf that was on his shoe in Jeff Woodling's milk. So somehow when Jeff's not looking, they shove the leaf in Jeff's milk, and when he goes to drink it, he sucks part of that leaf up in his straw, and he starts spitting it out and everything. Well, one of the daughters of Attila the Hun was the person that monitored lunchroom. So there's a half a dozen of us ate just laughing, So you're supposed to be solemn and all that stuff. So she comes up and was trying to figure out what's up. Well, Jeff's still sort of choking and coughing in this. So she was like number 2 in command. Actual Attila the Hun was the one that was in command. So that person comes over to see what's going on at our table. So I can still hear her. She's just pointing. She says, all these kids here need to go to the assistant principal, which was worse than going to the principal's office, right? Because the principal was supposed to be nice. The assistant principal was the disciplinarian. So we all get sent down to the assistant principal, and the thing that I wasn't involved. I laughed, but I didn't stick the leaf in the kid's milk. So the thing that I got that I didn't think I deserved was for the next week we had to set up the cafeteria instead of going on recess to get everybody ready. So to this day, all I did was laugh. So an example of something that you got that you didn't deserve, or something you didn't get that you did deserve. Who's got an example? Don't leave me hanging.
I can tell you that
Okay.
I got a whipping one time that I didn't deserve.
Okay.
That's all I'm gonna say. I mean, my dad found out later on I didn't deserve it. He didn't apologize.
You got a woman you didn't deserve. Anybody else?
Well, that happened in our family. If one of us did something wrong, all of us got because this was going on.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't do it, you got a whipping anyway.
Guilt by association.
Well, because they couldn't tell for sure who was telling the truth.
That's right. Anyone else? So you can sort of see how we were brought up. All our examples were negative things, right? Nobody had an example of something positive happening that you didn't deserve.
If there were lots of things that happened to me that were positive that I didn't feel like I deserved. And one of them was, my senior year in high school, the Daughters of the American Revolution gave a scholarship to a worthy young lady, and I was up against, my name was in the hat, and I was up against some really, really fine, smart, popular, very, very deserving young ladies, and I got that scholarship, and I was just glad I passed it.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Well, that's a good example of something that you felt you may have gotten that you didn't deserve. So we've got all the groundwork laid for class today. Anita's going to take the first part. I may chime in a little bit, and then I'll take over the second part. And I'm guessing Anita may chime in a little bit as well.
Yeah, my example was kind of the same. It was first grade in the gym with a group that were talking. I wasn't saying a word, and we all got a swat with a paddle. I was devastated. It's the only swat I ever got in school, so yeah, did not deserve it. Anyway, today we're going to be reading chapter 6 from chapter 6, and I'll be asking people to read some. So if you want to turn to there, and we're going to read just 2 or 3 verses at a time. And so if somebody has it ready, would like to read verses 1 through 3, let's start there. Just read it really loud. Go ahead.
On that night, the king could not sleep, and he ordered that the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, he brought, and they were read before the king. And it was found written there how Mordecai had told of Bigtana.
That's good.
Is that right?
That's not-
Bigtana and Teresh, 2 of the king's attendants who guarded the door, who had sought to lay hands on King Circe. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been given Mordecai for this?" Then the king's servants who ministered to him said, "Nothing has been done for him."
All right. If you remember a couple weeks ago when Paul taught, he had the whole English thing going, talking about the middle of the story. Today we're hitting that literary middle of the story that he talked about. Things, and we may let the tables start to turn. Things are starting to change around now with everything. So, Haman being the bad guy, having his way all the time, and the Jews kind of being oppressed. We're going to start seeing a change here. And so, starting out, Xerxes can't sleep for whatever reason, maybe one of my thoughts was, hey, maybe he's excited about the next banquet Esther's going to put on, right? Yeah, hey, today's another big banquet. Esther's going to tell me what she wants, can't wait. Maybe he's just too hot, maybe he's too cold. For some reason, he can't sleep. And so he says, hey, bring these, bring the chronicles of, the things that have happened over the years and read some to me. What do you think he was asking for that? No, nothing said why, I just kind of throw out there.
Maybe historical relevance?
Do what?
Historical relevance?
Historical relevance? Yeah, maybe he's just saying, hey, what's happened in the past? Let me just kind of go over things that I've done in my kingdom. My first thought is boring legal stuff. I'm going back to sleep, right? So there's some possibilities there. Maybe he's thinking, maybe there's something that's happened that I still need to take care of. Maybe there's something I've missed that I need to take care of. Which kind of happens. He says, hey, yeah, Mordecai basically saved my life. Brought the spot, we took care of it. Did anything happen for him? No, we never did anything. And Mordecai was just like, he just went about his business, right? He didn't think he deserved anything. It's my job. I found out a plot was assassinating the king. I reported it. Got taken care of. My job. I don't deserve anything. But King Xerxes decides we should do something for him. Why do you think why do you think 5 years later he's popular with this? Why would he do that? Any thoughts?
Maybe because he figures he wouldn't be in that position still if it hadn't been for Mordecai, right? Great.
He may be feeling a little bit grateful at this point, right? You know, I really should have thanked him, should have sent him a thank you note or something, right? Some flowers. Maybe thinking, you know what? I should do something because this is a very trusted servant, and I want to stay in his good graces. I want this guy on my side, right? I want somebody that's going to be taking care of me.
So what's the irony here? So the king's thinking, I'd like to do something for Mordecai. What's Mordecai's situation right now?
He's hated by Haman.
He's hated by Haman. What else?
He's still that mentor for the queen, which I don't know that the king knew this.
Okay, that situation is there, absolutely right. What else?
But his people have been, there's an edict against his people that they will die.
So Haman got the king to agree without telling him it was the Jews. He kept that secret from the king when he told him. There's this edict now that at this date in the future, every single Jew is going to be eradicated, going to be killed and plundered in the land. And what about Mordecai himself? What's Haman got planned for Mordecai? He's got the gallows. And as Anita and Don mentioned before, it's not the gallows as we would think we were going to get hung. It's a big pole that they're going to impale Mordecai on the top. So while the king's unable to sleep, Mordecai's back home realizing that all my people are going to be killed and I'm going to be impaled on top of this pole. I'm not sure things could be more bleak for Mordecai, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure at this point the king even knows that the people that are going to be eradicated are Jews.
I don't think he does.
He's just let Haman take. He says there's this people, which we'll point out in a minute too. So as he's reading this, apparently it's daylight while he's, day has come, he's decided I'm not going back to sleep or reading. He says, well, hey, let's read verses 4 through 6 and see what he does. Got it, Presley? Go ahead.
Okay. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows, and that he had erected for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." The king ordered, "Bring him in." When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me?
Yeah. So who's hanging out in the court? Ironically, it's Haman. What's the odds? I just love the timing in this story. Timing is everything in this story. So as Haman says,
He and I were talking Thursday night in preparation today. Wouldn't this make a great miniseries? I mean, all these twists and turns and folks hating each other and things getting turned around. I mean, this would be a miniseries.
yeah. So yeah, it's just like this is one of the most dramatic stories, tales, novels, whatever in the Bible to me. It's one of I love stories, so this is absolutely one of my favorites. So timing's everything. So the king brings him and says, "Hey, I got this guy and I just want to bestow all kinds of honor on him. What do you think I should do for him?" And of course, Haman's ego is like, "Of course it's me, right?" Who else would he want to do? Who else would he want to honor? So, and remember, why was Haman there? We just talked about. He's about to ask a favor of the king. And that favor is, I got this guy that's just thorn in my side, drives me crazy. I just can't stand it. Can I hang him? Hopefully the king's in agreement. But yeah, sure, go ahead, whatever you want. But before you get to this, the king has a question for him. It says, what should be done? So read, and so the king tells him this. And so we're going to talk a little bit before we go on. He says, Well, let's read verses 7 through 9 and then we'll talk about
Well,
it. Go ahead.
just before that,
Yeah,
when Haman wanted to have the Jews killed and got the king to agree, he didn't tell them it was the Jews. So the king agrees without knowing it's the Jews. When the king's saying he wants to honor somebody, he's not saying it's Mordecai.
yeah.
He's just sort of, throwing it out there. And of course, with Haman's ego, Haman's thinking, well, who's going to be honored other than me? I'm number 2 in charge. Of course it's going to be me. So,
All right, we're gonna, somebody read verses 7 through 9 for me. All right, Bob.
So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.
Okay, so let's get your little robe. Leaders will throw it on, get one of your horses. It has the crest, obviously, a royal horse, and let's lead it through. I have some other verses we want to read. Talk about a little bit about the robe and the meaning and the clothes and stuff like that. 1 Samuel 18, verse 4. Can anybody find that and read that for us? You have to just read it out.
Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt.
Okay. Yeah, so Jonathan is giving David his robe. Remember, they are best buds. They're so tight. And so he's bestowing some honor and favor on him, showing people that he has that by giving him his robe, even his spear to throw an arrow. This is royal stuff.
And what's extremely significant about that? What was Jonathan's position at the time?
The king's son.
He was the king's son. And what normally happened when the king was dead? Who was usually the successor?
The prince.
The prince, the son. So Saul realizes that David's more than likely going to be king. So even though Saul is next in line, he realizes that and he gives David his robe.
Yeah, Jonathan was saying his robe. Yeah. I think Jonathan was recognizing David. So he's showing the honor going to David. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 13 through 14. I had this one slide. Somebody have that?
Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over.
Okay, so this is, although Elijah's not royalty, like that, but there's a power associated with it. There's an authority associated with this cloak. Elisha takes up, and Elisha recognizes this, that the power, this represents God's power. He uses it to cross the river back. If you don't know the rest of the story, go back and read it. That was a great story too. Okay, and then our next verse is Isaiah 61, 3 through 10.
And provide for those who grieve in Zion to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, and oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins, restore the places long devastated, They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Aliens will shepherd your flocks, foreigners will work your fields and vineyards, and you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and the riches you will boast. Instead of their shame, my people will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, they will rejoice in their inheritance. So they will inherit a double portion in their land, and everlasting joy will be theirs. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and iniquity. My faithfulness I will reward them, and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are the people of the Lord, and they are a people the Lord has blessed. I will delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation, arrayed me in a robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and a bride adorns herself with her jewels.
So he's talking about he's going to bless, bestow goodness on his people. They've been following what they're supposed to do. He's going to give them a robe of righteousness, a robe of garments, of splendid garments, show their authority and his pleasure with them. All right, Zechariah 3:3-7. And our last one's going to be Mark 5:27-28, if somebody wants to have that ready.
Zechariah. Now Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. And the angel said to those who were standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." Then he said to Joshua, "See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put rich garments on you." Then I said, "Put on a clean turban on his head." So they put a clean turban on his head and clothed him with it, while the angel of the Lord stood by. The angel of the Lord gave this charge to Joshua. "This is what the Lord Almighty says. If you will walk away in my ways and keep my requirements, if you will walk in my ways and keep my requirements, then you will govern my house and have charge of my courts, and I will give you a place among these standing here."
Okay, so Joshua's dressed in filthy garments. It says, take away those and put on clean, fine garments for him, symbolizing the taking away of sin. Remember, we are saved, we are robed in pureness. So, and here the garments are showing our salvation. And in Mark 5:27-28,
I got it.
okay.
She had heard the reports concerning Jesus, and she came up behind him in the throng and touched his garment. For she kept saying, "If I only touch his garments, I shall be restored to death."
Okay, remember the woman who'd been afflicted with bleeding for years? She's desperate.
One
She
of my
touches-
favorite songs,
Oh, it's
The
wonderful.
Heavenly Garment.
And so she says, I can judge. Her faith is so great. Just touch the hem, the very, very tip of his cloak, I will be healed. And she was.
Yeah.
And remember, Jesus was history here, Jesus was a rabbi. The rabbis wore the cloaks, had little tassels and things on him. So, she, showed that he was a rabbi, that he was a teacher, one of God's teachers. She's like, just touch, I know his power, he's a great one, I just need to touch. And she did, and she was healed. So God's power. So, who touched me? He felt it, yeah. Just fantastic story. So, clothing all through the Bible is very, very meaningful. The robes, commoners just didn't wear robes and clothes like that. This was for the rich or the kings, and queens and things like that. Someone who was honored and had authority. So he's telling Haman, all right, go do this. Go put that robe on. Show my honor. Show my authority. Go do this. Not just have it done. You go put this robe on Mordecai. You put him on the horse and lead him through the thing, which probably is getting into yours a little bit. But think about that. Haman's hearing this, that happens.
Okay, so the king couldn't sleep. He has the chronicles, the history written, that was written down, read to him. And Mordecai couldn't be in worse situation. It couldn't be more difficult for Mordecai at the time when the king is unable to sleep. Who in Jewish history was in pretty dire straits, and because of a king's disturbed sleep, things changed? Can you remember anybody else? Joseph, exactly right. So Joseph's in prison. The king has this disturbing dream, and that is the impetus for Joseph to come out of his dire straits. So now you've got Mordecai in dire straits. The king can't sleep. He has the chronicles read, and he decides he wants to honor him. Haman, wanting to get permission from the king to hang Mordecai, happens to be hanging out in the court. The king says, hey, I need somebody to do this honor for Mordecai. Who happens to be around? Haman. And so he asks Haman, hey, how would you want to honor someone? And you know what's interesting? You know, it doesn't exactly say it, but I think Haman was not only had a big ego, but I think he had a political agenda. So he could have said, king, give this person you want to honor 10% of all your wealth. Right? I mean, that could have been a response. He wanted Haman's thoughts on that. But Haman's picking something that would flatter the king. Hey, why don't you let somebody wear your robe and let somebody ride on your horse? So he's sort of pumping up the king while he's thinking he's going to be flattered. So let's go to verse 10. Who would read verse 10 for me? Preston, you do it again. Thank you.
Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended.
So, going back to the miniseries thing, could you imagine how the actor that's playing Haman, the look on his face? You know, not only are you not going to honor me, but the person I hate more than anyone else in all the world, that I was just going to ask you if I could kill him, you want me to do what? So, you can't have a bigger turn of events. How about verse 11? Someone read 11 for me.
Then Haman took the apparel and the horse and conducted Mordecai on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.
So how difficult would that have been? All this honor that you were expecting to take place for yourself, you're now having to do that for the person you probably despise more than anyone else. What do you think, Presley?
You know, the king knew that Mordecai was a Jew.
The king.
There's no secret to the king. But he don't know that he's given a decree, God's decree, he's going to kill him.
That's exactly right. Now, how did the king, when the king gave instructions to Haman, how did he refer to Mordecai?
Mordecai the Jew.
Mordecai the Jew. Now, a couple chapters ago, or I guess last chapter, in chapter 5, we talked about earlier, how did Haman refer to Mordecai?
That Jew.
That Jew. So he's gone from Mordecai, that Jew, to Mordecai, the Jew, that's going to be honored. You can't, in a matter of one chapter, you can't have much more change in the case of Mordecai. What else comes to mind when you think about verses 10 and 11? Anything else? What do you think the people in the city, the Jews and the non-Jews, what do you think their reaction was as Mordecai's being honored riding this horse through the city?
Well, you know that the Jews have been very proud, right?
The Jews had to be proud.
They've probably been ostracized at some point, or at least at Haman's hand, right? So you think that because he's being delighted by the king, that they get to stick their chest out a little bit, be very proud to be Jew, and say, hey, look at us.
I agree completely. Anything else?
But I think they probably could have been a little bit confused, or maybe even had some hope that somehow the edict would be withdrawn, seeing that, confused because this edict to kill them was out there, and here was a Jew being honored. And it's just, very weird.
It is.
Did the Jews know at this point, and I'm sorry I'm coming in late, but did the Jews know at this point that they were basically doomed?
Yes.
Oh, so they knew as a group,
Yeah,
right?
and one thing to point out before this is, remember, Esther, before the banquet she just had, told Mordecai, get all the Jews in Susa and fast for 3 days, which we know is Jews went with praying and things like that. So you think they just spent 3 days fasting, and they know that Esther is going to, might have been a little bit of hope for them. I mean, I would, after I've been praying and I see a Jew being honored now by the very man who sent out the edict, might have given me a little hope for the people, you know.
And to your point, it's interesting that they didn't, by Mordecai being paraded around the square, like you said, they had to be confused because they know that they're supposed to be killed. Why are they doing this, right?
So can't you picture the two Jews sitting there watching this going on? Isn't that Mordecai? Yeah, that's Mordecai. Well, wait a second. Isn't that Haman that's walking them through? Didn't Haman? What is going on? I don't understand. And it wasn't just the Jews that knew they were doomed. All the other residents
Knew that they were doomed.
Wait a second. Isn't this a Jew that we're supposed to, in a few months, kill everybody? You know, what is going on here? So I think the Jews had some great pride seeing Mordecai honored. I think they were confused and very possibly could have some hope, right? But, you know, have the tables really turned? It looks like Mordecai's the one being honored, and Haman's the one that's sort of
Leading the horse.
Something else, as much as he probably just literally hated to do that, worse than that was disobeying the king.
Yeah.
I mean, so you heard, this is the last thing in the world he wanted to do. Actually, it's the second last thing. The last thing he wanted to do was insult the king, you know, because he said he's looking for positions of power, wanting to curry favor with the king. So he's, much as he hates to do it, he's doing it.
So what's Mordecai thinking? Have I lost? Can you still hear me okay? What's Mordecai thinking? He had to know Haman hated him. So, you know, Mordecai says, you want me to do what? You know, is this a setup? Am I gonna be walked through on this horse and people are gonna shoot? You know, Mordecai's got to be somewhat confused as well. Okay, so the story continues. Let's go to, which verse are we on now? Verse 12. Let's read. Let's just read verse 12. Someone read that for me.
Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief.
So, what was in Haman's mind when he went to the king's court first thing in the morning?
He was going to be honored.
Or even before that?
Asking he was going to kill Mordecai.
Yeah. So I'm going, and you remember, how did he come up with the idea to kill Mordecai? Do you remember last week?
his wife,
So he goes home complaining that Mordecai, that Jew, won't bow down to me when I'm walking the streets. So he goes home belly aching to his wife and friends. And they said, well, you know what you can do? Set up this big gallows or set up this big pole and just execute Mordecai in front of everybody. So that was just the night before. So he's headed into the king's court, and he knows he's going to be able to convince the king to kill Mordecai, that Jew. And a couple hours later, he's back at the king's gate after giving this honor to Mordecai that he had dreamed up to have for himself. So he goes back to the king's gate. Okay, verse 13.
and he told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. He will surely come to ruin.
Okay, so the exact same folks that said, let's do the end of Mordecai, now he goes home really belly aching, tells them everything he had to do, and their response is,
You're done.
You're toast.
you are toast.
Well, you really can't kill him now, right?
Yeah.
You can't really kill him.
Right. You're done, you can't kill him, you're toast. And could you imagine the look on Haman's face as he's having to tell him, you know, don't. He seems like the big brat that's just belly aching, right? He's just, things did not go his way, and he's complaining to mom, his wife, and friends. So,
To me, I think, I'm just like, you're fed up probably with him at this point. I feel like, you know what? We told you what to do. This has happened. They know the Jewish history. They know God's for the Jews. They're like,
now, how would his wife and friends know the Jewish history? Why would they know there's no way you can take on Mordecai now because of his God? How would they know that?
Because those people were the ones in captivity, and there's so much history between
The
their
Amalekites.
people and the Jews.
So, and you're exactly right. You know, even when God was taking the children of Egypt out of Israel, he purposely hardened Pharaoh's heart for him not to let them go. And each time he says, I want to do another plague. And I want this one to be worse than the last one. He wanted to make the point. And then as the children of Israel took over the land of Canaan, he continually made sure in the wars that they knew it was God that was giving them that portion of the land, that it wasn't the strength of their army. So there is probably no one in this entire region that had no idea of Yahweh, the Israelites' God. And they said, hey, you know,
You can't fight God.
that's worse than City Hall, right? Okay, so let's go on to verse 14.
While they were still talking with him, the king's
Eunuchs.
arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
So this is banquet number what?
2.
2. What was the deal with banquet number 1? Just sort of a reminder.
The queen didn't want to go. She didn't go.
That's
that's
a banquet years before.
Okay.
So that absolutely happened. That was years before. So
She invited them to another banquet.
okay.
Right.
So
And it was for the king. She wanted to impress the king.
and you remember when she went to ask the king, she got all dressed up and dialed up, and you're not supposed to approach the king unless he calls you. So Esther goes out into the outer court all dressed up, just sort of, probably putting her best flirt on, right? And the king says, "Oh, I'm having a bad day. Esther, why don't you come in here?"
And Chuck, there's, wording is such that there must have been one of her, robes and crowns and whatever that spoke queen.
Absolutely
Because
right.
he recognized that from a distance.
You're
That
exactly right.
she was approaching him as his queen, not just to ask a favor, but as his queen.
That's right. That's right. And that's an excellent point, because she's probably in the same spot a few days earlier that Haman was standing. And the king didn't know that it was Haman. He had to ask the advisors who sat out in the court. But he was able to recognize the queen right away. Now, just as, again, remember a couple, 3 weeks ago, how did Esther get the idea to throw this banquet? Remember? Her and Mordecai, now that the edict is out to kill the Jews, they sort of got together and figured out what can we do. So Mordecai's out having fasting for 3 days with the rest of the Jews, and Queen Esther's making this approach where she's trying to figure out how can I ask the king to rescind this order to kill all the Jews. So, and she's pretty good. She has the first banquet, sort of whets the king's appetite, but she doesn't ask him then. And he says, "What would you want up to half of all my kingdom?" She says, "Well, what I really like is to have a second banquet." Okay? And so this second banquet is what Haman is just being escorted to.
Yeah, remember, it's a banquet. She's invited just the king and Haman, 2 guests.
And Haman knows that.
Oh, Haman's.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
he's a big man.
So I don't know when he's being taken off to the banquet, he's thinking, well, I had to do this stuff with Mordecai, but it's still just me, the king, and the queen, right? We're going to have dinner together.
And he doesn't know that Esther's a Jew. Haman doesn't.
I don't think, does anyone know for sure? I think that's true. I think he
I
does.
don't think he does, because as you'll find out, he's surprised.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right, Charles. I think you're absolutely right, Charles. So we're just about out of time. Anything in the lessons that we've had so far that you want to bring up, or anything from the lesson today?
Couple of last points I have is just as when the eunuchs came to be taken, that was very common for the kings to send his limo to go get to go pick up your guests for the banquet. So that was very common. Genesis talks about that in Matthew, the parable of the banquet. Talks about kings sending out to bring people in. And just remember, so far, the only issue that Haman has with everything is he's super embarrassed by having to leave Mordecai around and everything. He's over the Jews, everybody knows he can't stand Haman, or he can't stand Mordecai. And now he's super embarrassed that all this has happened. But so far, he's probably thinking, okay, not going the way I planned, but I can get past this. So he's being rushed off, forgot about the banquet, getting rushed off. We say, okay, maybe things will still be okay. Next week, we'll find out. We'll see.
Okay, we're in the mini-series. That means you got to come back next week. No.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.